mountains of stones and animal skins wherever they went. For millions of years, men's tools had been simply stones of useful shapes. Cro-Magnon man, however, made specialized tools and weapons of wood and bones. He was no longer a naked ape, for he used skins for clothing. His society was organized, he lived in clans with a patriarchal hegemony. His cave drawings bespeak artistry and depth of feeling. His drawings and sculptures evidence some form of religion, apparent in the worship of a mother goddess, who was sometimes depicted with the sign of the moon's crescent. He buried his dead, and must therefore have had some philosophies regarding life, death, and perhaps even an afterlife. As mysterious and unexplained as the appearance of Cro-Magnon man has been, the puzzle is still more complicated. For, as other remains of modern man were discovered at sites including Swanscombe, Steinheim, and Mount Moria, it became apparent that Cro-Magnon man stemmed from an even earlier Homo sapiens who lived in Western Asia and North Africa some 2,500,000 years before Cro-Magnon man. The appearance of modern man a near 700,000 years after Homo erectus, and some 200,000 years before Neanderthal man is absolutely implausible. It is also clear that Homo sapiens represents such an extreme departure from the slow evolutionary process, that many of our features, such as the ability to speak, are totally unrelated to the earlier primates. An outstanding authority on the subject, Professor Theodosius Dobzhansky, Mankind Evolving, was especially puzzled by the fact that this development took place during a period when Earth was going through an ice age, a most unpropitious time for evolutionary advance. Pointing out that Homo sapiens lacks completely some of the peculiarities of the previously known types, and has some that never appeared before, he concluded modern man has many fossil collateral relatives, but no progenitors. The derivation of Homo sapiens, then, becomes the puzzle. How, then, did the ancestors of modern man appear some 300,000 years ago, instead of 2 million, or 3 million years in the future, following further evolutionary development? Were we imported to Earth from elsewhere, or were we, as the Old Testament and other ancient sources claim, created by the gods? We now know where civilization began, and how it developed once it began. The unanswered question is why? Why did civilization come about at all? For, as most scholars now admit in frustration, by all data man should still be without civilization. There is no obvious reason that we should be any more civilized than the primitive tribes of the Amazon jungles, or the inaccessible parts of New Guinea, but we are told these tribesmen still live as if in the Stone Age, because they have been isolated. But isolated from what? If they have been living on the same Earth as we, why have they not acquired the same knowledge of sciences and technologies on their own, as we supposedly have? The real puzzle, however, is not the backwardness of the Bushmen, but our advancement, for it is now recognized that in the normal course of evolution man should still be typified by the Bushmen, and not by us. It took man some 2 million years to advance in his tool industries from the use of stones, as he found them, to the realization that he could chip and shape stones to better suit his purposes. Why not another 2 million years to learn the use of other materials, and another 10 million years to master mathematics, and engineering and astronomy? Yet here we are, less than 50,000 years from Neanderthal man, landing astronauts on the moon. The obvious question, then, is this: did we and our Mediterranean ancestors really acquire this advanced civilization on our own? Though Cro-Magnon man did not build skyscrapers nor use metals, there is no doubt that his was a sudden and revolutionary civilization. His mobility, ability to build shelters, his desire to clothe himself, his manufactured tools, his art, all were a sudden high civilization, breaking an endless beginning of man's culture that stretched over millions of years and advanced at a painfully slow pace. Though our scholars cannot explain the appearance of Homo sapiens and the civilization of Cro-Magnon man, there is by now no doubt regarding this civilization's place of origin: the Near East. The uplands and mountain ranges that extend in a semi-arc from the Zagros Mountains in the east, where present-day Arun and Iraq border on each other, to the Ararat and Taurus ranges in the north, then down, westward, and southward, to the hill lands of Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, are replete with caves, where the evidence of prehistoric but modern man has been preserved. One of these caves, Shinar, is located in the northeastern part of the semi-arc of civilization. Nowadays, fierce Kurdish tribesmen seek shelter in the area's caves for themselves and their flocks during the cold winter months. So it was, one wintry night 44,000 years ago, when a family of 7, one of whom was a baby, sought shelter in the cave of Shinar. Their remains, they were evidently crushed to death by a rockfall, were discovered in 1957 by a startled Ralph Solecki, who went to the area in search of evidence of early man. Professor Solecki has told me that 9 skeletons were found, of which only 4 were crushed by rockfall. What he found was more than he expected. As layer upon layer of debris was removed, it became apparent that the cave preserved a clear record of man's habitation in the area from about 100,000 to some 13,000 years ago. What this record showed was as surprising as the find itself. Man's culture has shown not a progression, but a regression. Starting from a certain standard, the following generations showed not more advanced, but less advanced standards of civilized life. And from about 27,000 BC to 11,000 BC, the regressing and dwindling population reached a point of an almost complete absence of habitation. For reasons that are assumed to have been climatic, man was almost completely gone from the whole area for some 16,000 years. And then, circa 11,000 BC, thinking man reappeared with new vigor, and on an inexplicably higher cultural level. It was as if an unseen coach, watching the faltering human game, dispatched to the field a fresh and better trained team to take over from the exhausted one. Throughout the many millions of years of his endless beginning, man was nature's the he subsisted by gathering the foods that grew wild, by hunting the wild animals, by catching wild birds and fishes. But just as man's settlements were thinning out, just as he was abandoning his abodes, when his material and artistic achievements were disappearing, just then, suddenly, with no apparent reason, and without any prior known period of gradual preparation, man became a farmer. Summarizing the work of many eminent authorities on the subject, R.J. Braidwood and Howe prehistoric investigations in Iraqi Kurdistan concluded that genetic studies confirm the archaeological finds, and leave no doubt that agriculture began exactly where thinking man had emerged earlier with his first crude civilization in the Nibiru. There is no doubt by now that agriculture spread all over the world from the Near-Eastern arc of mountains and highlands. Employing sophisticated methods of radiocarbon dating and plant genetics, many scholars from various fields of science concur in the conclusion that man's first farming venture was the cultivation of wheat and barley, probably through the domestication of a wild variety of emmer. Assuming that, somehow, man did undergo a gradual process of teaching himself how to domesticate, grow, and farm a wild plant, the scholars remain baffled by the profusion of other plants and cereals basic to human survival and advancement that kept coming out of the Near East. These included, in rapid succession, millet, rye, and spelt among the edible cereals, flax, which provided fibers, and edible oil, and a variety of fruit-bearing shrubs and trees. In every instance, the plant was undoubtedly domesticated in the Near East for millennia before it reached Europe. It was as though the Near East were some kind of genetic botanical laboratory, guided by an unseen hand, producing every so often a newly domesticated plant. The scholars who have studied the origins of the grapevine have concluded that its cultivation began in the mountains around northern Mesopotamia and in Syria and Palestine. No wonder. The Old Testament tells us that Noah planted a vineyard and even got drunk on its wine after his ark rested on Mount Ararat as the waters of the deluge receded. The Bible, like the scholars, thus places the start of vine cultivation in the mountains of northern Mesopotamia. Apples, pears, olives, figs, almonds, pistachios, walnuts, all originated in the Near East and spread from there to Europe and other parts of the world. Indeed, we cannot help recalling that the Old Testament preceded our scholars by several millennia in identifying the very same area as the world's first orchard, and the Lord God planted an orchard in Eden, in the east. And the Lord God caused to grow out of the ground every tree that is pleasant to behold and that is good for eating. The general location of Eden was certainly known to the biblical generations. It was in the east